The grand chandelier in the lavish dining room of the affluent Westbrook mansion sparkled as the crystal glasses clinked, and laughter echoed off the walls. The Westbrooks were the epitome of wealth, elegant, sophisticated, and surrounded by luxury. The house was filled with fine art, expensive furniture, and the kind of opulence that made anyone who entered feel small in comparison. But in the corner of this pristine home, an unlikely scene was unfolding. A young boy, barely 10 years old, stood in front of the Westbrook couple, his clothes worn and his face a picture of both hope and hesitation. His name was Thomas, and he was an orphan who had been invited to the Westbrook estate for a Christmas charity event. The wealthy couple, Eleanor and Charles Westbrook, were known for their philanthropy, but it was more about their social standing than a deep-rooted care for the less fortunate. Thomas held in his hands a simple, yet heartfelt, drawing of a large house with a heart in the center of it, a dream he had longed for since he could remember. It was his vision of the future, one where he could find a family that would love him. "I made this for you," Thomas said shyly, his voice trembling slightly. "It's my dream. I want to have a big house like this one. I want to take care of other kids like me when I grow up." Eleanor, sipping her wine, looked at the drawing with a half-smile. She exchanged a glance with her husband Charles, who raised an eyebrow. They both chuckled softly, their laughter too loud and too careless for someone so young to hear. "How quaint," Eleanor remarked, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "A dream of taking care of other children. How noble." She shot a condescending look at the boy before taking another sip of her wine. Charles leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms. "A little boy's dream of playing house. What's next, Thomas? Will you have a pet tiger and a pool in every room?" he said, snickering at the absurdity of the thought. The laughter between them grew louder, but Thomas, unable to understand the sharpness in their tone, smiled nervously, holding up his drawing even higher, hoping for validation that would never come. I thought you would like it," Thomas whispered, his heart sinking. His face reddened as he realized he was being mocked. Years later, the Westbrooks' mansion would no longer be filled with the same warmth. The laughter that once echoed throughout the halls was replaced by silence. The business ventures they had been so proud of had taken a turn for the worse, and the lavish lifestyle they once enjoyed had begun to crumble under the weight of financial ruin. It started with poor investments, then a series of failed business deals. The once thriving company the Westbrooks had founded with their wealth was now deep in debt, and no one in town seemed willing to offer them the help they needed. They had lost friends, respect, and most importantly, their influence. The mansion, once a symbol of their superiority, now stood as a reminder of their downfall. One evening, Charles paced restlessly in the study, phone in hand, trying to reach anyone who could lend them a lifeline. Eleanor sat at the desk, the weight of their situation weighing on her. They had nowhere left to turn. It was then that Charles's phone buzzed. A name popped up on the screen, one that made him freeze in his tracks: Thomas Westbrook. For a moment, Charles hesitated. The young boy they had once mocked, whose dream they had ridiculed, was now a successful businessman in his own right. Over the years, Thomas had worked tirelessly, transforming his childhood dream into reality. He had built a non-profit organization aimed at providing homes and education for orphan children, eventually creating a series of community centers for disadvantaged youth. He had become the very thing the Westbrooks once laughed at, a figure of wealth and influence, though for entirely different reasons. Now, Thomas was reaching out. "Hello," Charles said, his voice unsure as he answered the call. "Mr. Westbrook," came the calm, collected voice on the other end. It was Thomas. "I heard about the trouble your business has fallen into. I'm willing to offer my help, if you'd like. I've been fortunate enough to build connections over the years, and I believe I can provide you with the resources you need to get back on your feet." Charles swallowed hard, a sense of embarrassment creeping over him. He remembered the boy's nervous smile, his hopeful eyes, the boy who had wanted nothing more than a chance to be seen, respected. And now, that boy was offering them the very lifeline they had once dismissed so casually. The Westbrooks, desperate, agreed to meet Thomas at one of his community centers. It was a humble building, starkly different from the grandeur of their mansion. As they walked through the doors, they were greeted by the sight of children, Children of all ages, engaged in different activities. There was no air of superiority here, only collaboration and community. The place was vibrant with life, full of hope and purpose. Thomas walked toward them, a slight smile on his face. He was dressed in a simple but elegant suit, his presence commanding without being overbearing. He extended his hand to Charles and Eleanor. "Thank you for coming," Thomas said, his voice calm, yet laced with the weight of everything that had come before. The Westbrooks exchanged uneasy glances before shaking his hand. "You've done well for yourself," Eleanor said, her voice soft with both admiration and guilt. Thomas nodded. "I've worked hard. But more importantly, I've learned that success isn't just about money, it's about giving back, about helping others who don't have the opportunities one was fortunate enough to receive." Charles cleared his throat, feeling the sting of his earlier arrogance. "We didn't realize the value of what you were doing back then. We didn't understand your dream." Thomas met their eyes, his expression unreadable. "It's not about understanding, Mr. and Mrs. Westbrook. It's about respect. You didn't see me as someone who could help, someone who could make a difference. But I've learned that you can't wait for others to believe in you. You just have to make your own way." As the conversation continued, Thomas offered them the resources they so desperately needed. But there was a catch. He would only help if they agreed to shift their focus, to rebrand their company, and to use their remaining wealth to support charitable causes. He wanted them to understand the importance of giving back, just as he had. Charles and Eleanor were stunned. It was a generous offer, but it came with an understanding that had once eluded them, the understanding that true success didn't come from power, status, or wealth alone, but from the difference you made in the lives of others. For the first time in years, they truly listened. And as they left that community center, they couldn't help but feel that, in a strange twist of fate, they were the ones who had been given a second chance, this time, by the boy they had once mocked. Timmy's journey had come full circle. The child they had laughed at had not only succeeded, but he had thrived in a way they could never have imagined. And now, as he offered them the help they had once refused to offer him, they understood just how deeply he had learned from his past, and how much he had grown beyond their expectations. The days following their meeting with Thomas were filled with internal conflict for the Westbrooks. Charles and Eleanor had spent years building their lives around wealth and status, believing that those were the markers of true success. Now, they were facing a reality where those same ideals were crumbling in front of them, replaced by a new, more humbling truth. It wasn't about power or money, it was about making a meaningful impact on the world. They knew they couldn't ignore Thomas's offer. He had built something far more substantial than the Westbrooks ever had. His nonprofit, his community centers, his mission, all of it was a testament to hard work, compassion, and resilience. And here they were, standing at the precipice, offered a chance not just to save their company, but to save themselves. Charles sat at his desk late one night, staring at the papers scattered in front of him. The numbers, the projections, the plans, they all seemed to blur together. Everything that had once seemed so certain now felt uncertain. He picked up the phone, dialing the number that had been on his mind for days. "Hello." Thomas's calm voice answered, as if he had been expecting the call. "Thomas, it's Charles Westbrook," Charles said, his voice strained with the weight of what he was about to ask. "We've been thinking about your offer, and I think we're ready to take you up on it." There was a pause on the other end of the line before Thomas responded. "I'm glad to hear that, Mr. Westbrook. But remember, this is more than just about saving your business. It's about changing the way you think, about how you use what you have for the greater good." Charles nodded, though Thomas couldn't see him. "We understand. We're willing to change, to rebrand our company, to shift the focus. We're ready to start giving back." The next week, the Westbrooks began the difficult process of rebuilding, not just their company, but their lives. They met with Thomas regularly, discussing how to reframe their business practices and invest in charitable projects. They learned about sustainable business models, social impact, and the importance of creating lasting change, not just profits. But the process wasn't easy. The Westbrooks had to confront their past, their pride, and their outdated views. Eleanor, especially, struggled with the idea of giving up the lavish lifestyle she had once so fiercely clung to. But as time passed, she began to see that the true reward wasn't in the material wealth, but in the work they could do to help others. One sunny afternoon, Thomas invited the Westbrooks to one of his community centers, this time in a more urban setting. It was a large building, full of energy and life. Children were playing, adults were engaged in workshops, and volunteers were actively involved in improving the lives of those around them. As the Westbrooks walked through the center, they saw the direct impact of Thomas's work. The walls were covered with murals, vibrant with stories of the kids who had come through the program. One of the children, a young girl no older than 8, approached Thomas with a picture she had drawn, a house with a big heart in the middle, just like the one Thomas had drawn as a child. "This is for you," she said, handing the picture to Thomas with a wide, proud smile. Thomas bent down, his face softening as he took the picture. "Thank you," he said, his voice full of genuine appreciation. "This is beautiful." Eleanor, who had been standing quietly by, turned to Charles, her eyes filled with emotion. "This is real. This is what matters," she whispered, her voice trembling. Charles looked at his wife, his own heart swelling with understanding. "We've spent so much of our lives chasing the wrong things," he said. "But now I see. This is what we were meant to do." The Westbrooks' transformation was not instantaneous, but it was real. They began investing in projects that would create sustainable change, funding scholarships, supporting local businesses, and funding mentorship programs for children. They partnered with Thomas's organization, using their remaining wealth to provide resources for the children's education and development. Slowly, the Westbrooks started to rebuild, but this time with a new sense of purpose. Their company, once focused on personal gain, now operated under the banner of social impact. They had rebranded, not just their company, but their identity. They were no longer the couple who mocked a child's dream. They were now the couple working to make that dream come true for other children. Children who had been left behind just as Thomas once had been. Months later, the Westbrooks stood before a new group of volunteers at a fundraising gala. It wasn't as glamorous as their old events, but it was far more meaningful. The crowd consisted of donors, volunteers, and young people whose lives had been changed by their efforts. The room was filled with excitement, anticipation, and a genuine sense of giving. Eleanor stood at the podium, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "We've spent our lives building things, homes, businesses, reputations. But what we've learned is that none of that matters if we're not using it to build a better world. This is just the beginning for us. And we're so grateful to be a part of something bigger than ourselves." Charles stood beside her, his heart full of gratitude. "We've made mistakes in the past. We've laughed at dreams we didn't understand. But today, we stand here with you, knowing that we found something worth believing in. This is our second chance." They looked out into the crowd and across the room. Thomas smiled at them, nodding in approval. The boy they had once mocked had not only achieved his dream, but he had brought them with him, showing them the path to redemption. The Westbrooks' journey from arrogance to humility had been a long one, but it was one they never regretted. Through their partnership with Thomas and the ripple effect of their newfound purpose, they had found something far more valuable than wealth: the knowledge that true success lay in what you gave to the world, not what you took. And as they looked at the children in the room, the ones they had once disregarded, they understood that the impact they had made together would last far beyond their lifetime. As the months went by, the Westbrooks became more and more involved in the work of their nonprofit initiatives. They began attending community meetings, reaching out to local schools, and personally interacting with the people whose lives they had once looked down upon. With each step they took, their understanding of what truly mattered grew deeper. However, while the work they were doing filled them with a sense of purpose, it also came with its own set of challenges. The road to redemption was never smooth, and they were learning that it wasn't just about changing their own actions, it was about shifting the perception of others, too. One afternoon, while Charles was reviewing some new financial reports in his office, Eleanor received a call that would once again test the Westbrooks' resolve. "Eleanor," the voice on the other end said, "we've been hearing concerns from some of your partners. They're worried that you're focusing too much on charity and not enough on the bottom line. They think your company is losing its competitive edge." Eleanor listened in silence, her fingers gripping the phone. She had been waiting for this moment. waiting for someone to question their choices, to challenge the new direction they were so determined to follow. But the weight of hearing it now, after all they had invested in their change, made her pause. "We've come so far," she said quietly, more to herself than to the caller. "We've worked so hard to make a difference, to do something meaningful. And now they want us to go back to the way things were?" The voice on the other end was stern, but sympathetic. "You can't change the rules of the game, Eleanor. The world doesn't just work on goodwill. You need to balance your mission with profits if you want to survive in this world." Eleanor felt a pang of frustration. She had known this was coming, knew that others would want them to return to the old ways of focusing on profit at all costs. But for the first time, she wasn't sure how to navigate the tension between their newfound purpose and the harsh realities of business. Later that evening, Eleanor sat in the study, her fingers lightly tracing the edges of a photo album filled with images from their past, before they'd changed. The lavish parties, the trips abroad, the life of luxury they had once enjoyed seemed so distant now. She sighed, closing the album. Charles walked in, looking concerned as he noticed the troubled expression on her face. "What's wrong?" he asked gently. Eleanor looked up at him, the weight of the situation finally sinking in. "I just got off the phone with one of our partners. They're saying we've been focusing too much on our charity work and not enough on making money. They're worried we're losing our edge." Charles rubbed his temples, taking a seat next to her. "I knew this was coming. But Eleanor, we can't go back to the way we were. We've seen the difference we're making. And that's what matters now." Eleanor shook her head. "But what if they're right? What if we can't do both? What if we're setting ourselves up to fail?" Charles placed a hand on hers, his voice steady but filled with conviction. "We've built something real, Eleanor. And it's not just about the money anymore. We've chosen to be different, to stand for something greater than ourselves. Maybe it's time we show our partners that we're not just here for the profits, we're here to make an impact." In the coming weeks, Charles and Eleanor found themselves at a crossroads. Their partners, who had been skeptical from the start, began to push them harder. The pressure mounted to return to the more traditional business model, to refocus their attention on maximizing profits at all costs. They could feel the pull, the temptation to return to the familiar ways of power and wealth. But as they worked alongside Thomas, they were reminded of why they had made the decision to change in the first place. The children, the families they were helping, the communities they were lifting up, it was all real. The changes they had made were not just for their own benefit, they were for the benefit of others. One evening, as Charles sat in his office reviewing more financial projections, he had an epiphany. The Westbrooks had always prided themselves on being leaders, on being in control. But now, they realized that real leadership wasn't about control. It was about letting go. It was about allowing others to take the reins, to trust in the process, and to build something sustainable, not just for themselves, but for the greater good. The next morning, Charles called a meeting with their partners. Eleanor was at his side, her resolve firm, as they laid out their decision. "We've spent years chasing profits at any cost," Charles began, his voice calm but assertive. "And we've learned that it's never been enough. We've seen firsthand what it means to make a difference, and we're committed to that path. We are still dedicated to growing our business, but we are doing it in a way that supports people, not just the bottom line." Eleanor added, "We understand that this might not be the easiest decision for everyone. But we believe that real success isn't measured by how much money we make. It's measured by the impact we have. And we're ready to lead by that example." There was silence in the room as the partners exchanged glances, clearly uncertain. But then one of them spoke up. "We've seen the work you've done with Thomas. And we know you've made a real difference. If you're committed to this path, then we'll stand by you. But you'll need to prove that this model can work. And that means making tough choices." Charles and Eleanor nodded, their hearts swelling with both pride and anxiety. They knew the road ahead wouldn't be easy, but they also knew they were on the right path. Weeks passed, and the Westbrooks' new vision began to take root. They shifted their business model, embracing sustainability, ethical practices, and community outreach as key pillars of their company. They continued to support the nonprofit projects that Thomas had started, pouring resources into programs for at-risk youth, education, and healthcare. The transition wasn't seamless. But as time went on, they began to see results, not just in profits, but in the lives they were touching. Their company grew in a different way, one rooted in purpose rather than greed. One day, several months later, Thomas visited the Westbrooks at their company headquarters. He walked through the halls of the newly renovated building, now filled with natural light, vibrant murals, and a sense of community that hadn't been there before. "You've done it," Thomas said, his voice filled with genuine admiration. "You've changed everything." Eleanor smiled, her heart full. "We couldn't have done it without you, Thomas. You showed us what real leadership looks like. And you reminded us of what's truly important." Charles added, "It wasn't just about the money. It was about finding a way to do things that mattered. We're grateful you gave us that chance." Thomas nodded, his expression proud. "It's been an honor to watch you both grow. You've proven that it's possible to have both success and compassion. And that's the kind of legacy that lasts." The Westbrooks had come full circle, from arrogant socialites who mocked a boy's dream to the leaders of a movement that would change their world. They had learned that real success wasn't found in wealth, but in the difference you made in the lives of others. As they stood side by side with Thomas, looking out at the future, they knew that their journey was far from over. But one thing was clear, they were on the right path. And this time, it was a path they would walk with purpose, humility, and a deep commitment to making the world a better place. The Westbrooks had experienced profound change over the past year, but their journey was far from over. As they continued to build their new business model, centered around social impact and ethical practices, they began to see how much work still lay ahead. Their efforts to rebrand their company, while rewarding, were met with obstacles. In the corporate world, not everyone was ready to embrace their vision. Charles and Eleanor found themselves navigating the difficult terrain of convincing skeptics, balancing profit with purpose, and managing the challenges of a business that was now focused on long-term societal change rather than short-term gain. Yet, despite the difficulty, they were resolute in their commitment to the new path they had chosen. One morning, as Eleanor and Charles sat down to breakfast, Eleanor's phone buzzed. She picked it up, scanning the screen before her expression shifted. "It's from the mayor's office," Eleanor said, a hint of surprise in her voice. "They want to meet with us." Charles raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "The mayor? What could they want?" Eleanor read the message aloud. "They've heard about the changes we've made with the company. They want to discuss a partnership for a new community development project they're launching. They're interested in using our business model as a model for other companies in the region." Charles leaned back, his face lighting up with cautious optimism. "This is big, really big. If we can get this right, it could expand our impact even further." Eleanor smiled, her mind already racing with the possibilities. "Exactly. This could be a turning point." The meeting with the mayor took place a few days later in a conference room at City Hall. The mayor, a practical yet visionary woman named Margaret Harris, welcomed the Westbrooks warmly. She had heard about their transition from a traditional business model to one focused on giving back, and she was impressed with how they had navigated the challenges of such a dramatic change. "We've seen what you're doing and it's inspiring," Mayor Harris said as she sipped her coffee. "We're working on a new initiative to revitalize the city's downtown area, focusing on affordable housing, youth education, and providing new job opportunities. But we need partners who understand how to build something sustainable. We believe your company could be a cornerstone of this project." Eleanor and Charles exchanged a look, their hearts pounding with the weight of the opportunity. For years, they had built their lives around their personal success. Now, they had the chance to help transform an entire community. "This could be the future we've been working for," Eleanor said, her voice steady with resolve. "We want to be part of this, not just with our resources, but with our experience. We've learned so much from working alongside Thomas and the people we've met through the community centers. It's not just about what we can do, it's about how we can empower others to do the same." The mayor nodded, clearly impressed by their commitment. "Exactly. This isn't just about one company helping a city, it's about creating a network of support, a movement. I think you could be the catalyst for something even bigger." Over the next few months, the Westbrooks worked closely with Mayor Harris and other local organizations to develop the Community Development Project. Their role was pivotal, Not only did they provide financial support and leadership, but they also helped guide the project's mission, ensuring it aligned with their principles of sustainability, education, and social responsibility. But as the project progressed, they faced unforeseen challenges. Other business leaders, still skeptical of the Westbrook's new direction, questioned the project's viability. The media, too, was divided. Some praised their efforts, while others saw it as an attempt to revive their image after years of negative press. Charles and Eleanor knew that this project could make or break their legacy. They poured all their energy into the initiative, fighting to prove that a business could thrive while making a real difference in the community. They met with stakeholders, organized town hall meetings, and spoke to local leaders about the long-term benefits of their vision. One evening, as Charles walked through the construction site of a new community center being built as part of the revitalization project, he paused to take it all in. The building was still in its early stages, but he could already see the potential. This center would provide after-school programs, job training, and support for families in need. It was everything he and Eleanor had dreamed of when they started on this path. As he stood there, lost in thought, he received a phone call from Thomas. "Charles, I heard about the progress you're making," Thomas said, his voice filled with approval. "You're doing great work. I know it's tough, but you're building something that will outlast all the challenges." Charles smiled, feeling a deep sense of gratitude. "It's been harder than I imagined, Thomas. But I can see now that the hard work is worth it. We're not just helping people now, we're laying the foundation for a better future." Thomas paused for a moment, then spoke with quiet conviction. "You've come a long way, Charles. And Eleanor too. I'm proud of you both. Remember, this isn't about proving anything to anyone. It's about knowing that what you're doing matters, regardless of what anyone else thinks." Charles nodded, the weight of Thomas's words sinking in. "You're right. I think, for the first time, I'm finally starting to understand what it means to lead with purpose." Months later, the grand opening of the first community center, part of the larger revitalization project, took place. It was a significant moment for the Westbrooks, one they had worked toward for so long. The center was bustling with energy, filled with children, parents, and volunteers. The programs they had envisioned were already taking shape, providing resources to those who needed it most. As Charles and Eleanor stood at the podium, looking out over the crowd, they could see the fruits of their labor in the smiles of the people who had gathered there. This was the impact they had dreamed of, the kind of legacy they could be proud of. Eleanor took the microphone, her voice filled with emotion. "We stand here today not because of our success, but because of the success we've helped others build. This is just the beginning. Our commitment to this community, to these children, and to the future is unwavering." Charles joined her, placing a hand on her shoulder. "We've learned that true wealth isn't about what we have, it's about what we give. And today, we give our hearts to this community." The applause was deafening, and for the first time in their lives, the Westbrooks felt something that went beyond satisfaction. They felt fulfilled. They had built something that would last, something far more valuable than the fortune they once sought. A legacy of giving, of helping others rise above their circumstances. As they walked through the community center, taking in the vibrant energy around them, they realized that this was the future they had always wanted. The future they had once mocked, the future Thomas had shown them was possible. And together, they would continue to build a world that was better, one child, one family, one community at a time. As the months passed, the Westbrooks found themselves fully immersed in their new mission. The community center they had helped build was thriving, and their company, once driven solely by profit, had now embraced a social impact model. The Westbrooks were no longer seen as the wealthy elite. They were respected leaders in a movement to give back. However, while their work continued to inspire, they also encountered new challenges. The project was growing rapidly, and with success came growing pains. It became clear that to truly make a lasting impact, they would need to expand their efforts even further, beyond just the city limits of Harrowsville. Charles and Eleanor spent countless nights reviewing their strategy, discussing how they could take the model they had built in their town and apply it to larger cities. As they traveled to new regions to meet with potential partners and government officials, they began to realize that the world wasn't quite ready to accept such a bold approach. Many still viewed businesses like theirs as out of place in the nonprofit world, and the question of balancing profit with social good continued to weigh heavily on their minds. One day, while visiting one of their new community initiatives in a nearby city, Charles and Eleanor sat down for a meeting with a group of investors. They had reached out to these investors in hopes of securing funding to expand their programs to a national level. But as the meeting progressed, Charles began to sense the growing tension in the room. "We've reviewed your numbers," one of the investors said, his voice cold, "but we're not sure your business model is sustainable. You're focusing too much on the charitable side of things. Where's the return on investment? How do you plan to prove that these initiatives will create real profit for us?" Eleanor held her breath. She had heard this question before, many times. But it still stung, especially after all the hard work they had put into making a difference. "We believe that the return on investment comes in the form of a better society," Eleanor replied, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "We've seen firsthand that businesses can be profitable while also contributing to the community. We're not asking you to take a risk on charity. We're asking you to take a risk on something bigger, something more sustainable. When people thrive, so do businesses. And we're proving that every day." The investors exchanged skeptical glances. Charles felt the pressure mounting. The weight of their responsibility to prove their new model was sustainable had never felt heavier. But then, as if on cue, one of the investors, a woman in her late 30s, dressed in a sharp suit, spoke up. "I've been watching your progress," she said, her tone softer than the others. "And I'm willing to offer you a different kind of investment. Not just financial, but in terms of mentorship. I believe in your vision. If you're willing to continue growing your impact on a national level, you'll need more than just funds. You'll need a network of like-minded individuals who can help guide you. You'll need experts who understand how to navigate the complexities of expanding these kinds of initiatives." Charles and Eleanor exchanged a glance. They had spent so long trying to figure everything out on their own, trying to prove they could make it work without external help. But the reality was, they couldn't do it all by themselves. "That's exactly what we need," Charles said, his voice filled with gratitude. "If you can help us build those connections, we'd be honored to work with you." With the mentorship and support of this new investor, the Westbrooks began to expand their reach beyond Harrowsville. They launched new community initiatives in cities across the country, collaborating with local businesses, schools, and nonprofit organizations to create programs that would address systemic issues like poverty, education, and affordable housing. The Westbrooks learned quickly that building a national movement was no easy feat. They faced resistance from those who believed that profit and charity could never coexist. But they also found support from unexpected places. People who had experienced firsthand the power of giving back, people who were ready to put their money into something that could change the world. One day, as they were finalizing a new partnership in Chicago, Eleanor sat in a quiet moment reflecting on how far they had come. From the days when they had mocked Thomas's dream, to the days when they had faced ridicule for trying to balance profit and purpose, she realized how much had changed. They were no longer the people they once were. They had built something that was bigger than themselves. Charles walked into the room, carrying a letter. "You're going to want to see this," he said, handing it to her. Eleanor opened it, her eyes scanning the contents. It was an invitation to a national conference on corporate social responsibility, a platform where they would be able to share their journey with thousands of like-minded leaders. "We've been invited to speak," Eleanor said, her voice filled with surprise and excitement. "We have a chance to show the world what we've been working on." Charles smiled, a sense of pride swelling inside him. "We've come a long way. This is just the beginning." At the conference, as Charles and Eleanor took the stage in front of a packed auditorium, they felt both humbled and empowered. This was their moment to show the world that they were not just a couple who had made mistakes. They were leaders who had learned from those mistakes and were now creating real, lasting change. Eleanor spoke first, her voice steady as she addressed the crowd. "When we started this journey, we were driven by our own ambition. But over the years, we've learned that true success is measured by the impact we have on others. We've built a business model that values people, not just profits, and we've seen firsthand how businesses can thrive when they invest in their communities." Charles joined her at the podium, his voice strong and clear. We've made mistakes and we've faced setbacks. But we've never stopped believing that business can be a force for good. If we can do it, anyone can." As they spoke, the room filled with applause. And for the first time in their lives, Charles and Eleanor realized that the legacy they were building wasn't just about their own redemption. It was about creating a ripple effect that would inspire others to do the same, to balance ambition with compassion, profit with purpose. The Westbrooks' journey was far from over. There were still challenges to face, new obstacles to overcome. But one thing was certain: they had found their true path, not just as business leaders, but as people who had learned the importance of giving back, of creating a legacy that would last far beyond their own lifetimes. And as they looked out at the crowd, they knew that their story wasn't just about them. It was about the thousands of children, families, and communities they would continue to help, and the future they would build together. As the Westbrooks stepped off the stage at the national conference, the energy in the room was still palpable. The applause had been overwhelming, and there was a sense of validation in the air. For the first time, Charles and Eleanor felt as if they had truly arrived, not just as business leaders, but as advocates for a new model of success, one that integrated business with social responsibility. But as they made their way through the crowd, shaking hands with other leaders and responding to questions, Charles could feel the weight of what was to come. The applause was nice, but it was the next step that truly mattered. They were at the start of something much bigger, and the pressure to prove that their approach could work on a national scale was immense. A few days after the conference, Eleanor received a call from one of their largest potential investors. The conversation was tense, and it quickly became clear that not everyone was on board with the Westbrooks' vision. "We've been monitoring your progress," the investor's voice came through the phone. "Your initiatives are commendable, but we have concerns. The financials are solid, but your focus on social impact is beginning to overshadow the core business. We need to see more commitment to scaling the business if we're going to continue this partnership." Eleanor felt her heart sink. They had been working so hard to build this sustainable model, balancing social good with profitability. It was disheartening to hear that someone still viewed their mission as secondary to business growth. But Eleanor was determined to make her case. "I understand your concerns," she said, her voice calm but resolute. "But we believe that social responsibility isn't something we can just keep on the sidelines. It's integrated into everything we do. It's the future of business, and we're proving it." The investor hesitated, clearly unconvinced. "We need numbers, Eleanor. Show us the bottom line." Eleanor put the phone down after the call, her mind racing. She knew that balancing these two sides, business and social impact, wasn't going to be easy, but she refused to back down. This was the future they were creating, and they had to stand firm in their belief that business could do more than make profits. It could make a difference. The following weeks brought more meetings with potential investors, partners, and corporate leaders. While some embraced their vision, others were still hesitant. The Westbrooks knew they had to prove that their model could work on a larger scale. They decided to take a bold step forward. With Thomas's support, they began working on a new initiative, a national project that would bring businesses, nonprofits, and government entities together to address systemic issues like homelessness, job inequality, and access to education. They called it the Catalyst Initiative, a project designed to not only address immediate needs but to create lasting change through collaboration and innovation. This would be their largest undertaking yet, but it was also their biggest opportunity to prove that business could be the driving force behind large-scale social change. The day the Catalyst Initiative was announced to the public, the response was overwhelming. News outlets across the country picked up the story, and the media buzz was intense. The Westbrooks had successfully assembled an impressive group of partners, including major corporations, nonprofit organizations, and local government representatives, all of whom had signed on to be part of the initiative. Eleanor and Charles stood at a press conference, looking out at the sea of reporters in front of them. There was no turning back now. This was their chance to make a statement, one that would solidify their place as leaders of a new kind of corporate movement. "We stand here today," Eleanor began, her voice steady, "not as business owners, but as partners in a larger mission. This initiative is about collaboration. It's about bringing together the resources, expertise, and will of businesses, governments, and individuals to solve the problems that have been neglected for too long. We are committed to creating change that lasts, for our communities, for our children, and for the future. Charles joined her, his voice strong. We believe that businesses can be a force for good. It's time to show the world that social responsibility and business success are not mutually exclusive. Together, we can build a world where both thrive. The applause that followed was louder than they could have imagined. This wasn't just an announcement, it was the beginning of a movement. A movement that, with hard work and perseverance, could change the course of their business and of countless lives. As the Catalyst initiative took shape, the Westbrooks worked tirelessly to ensure its success. They coordinated with local communities, businesses, and nonprofits to develop programs that would address a wide range of issues, from affordable housing projects to job training programs for at-risk youth. The initiative brought people together in ways that Charles and Eleanor had never expected, creating a network of change agents who were all working toward the same goal. But the challenges were far from over. As the initiative expanded, so did the complexity of managing it. The Westbrooks found themselves overwhelmed by the scope of the project. There were long nights, endless meetings, and the constant pressure of ensuring that the balance between profit and purpose remained intact. One evening, after a particularly exhausting day of meetings, Charles and Eleanor sat down in their office, both feeling the weight of the world on their shoulders. "We've come so far," Eleanor said quietly, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and pride. "But I feel like there's so much more to do. I don't know if I can keep going at this pace." Charles nodded, rubbing his eyes. "I feel the same way, but we've built something incredible, and we can't turn back now." Eleanor looked at him, her expression softening. "You're right. We can't do it all, but we don't have to. We've built a team. We've built a movement. We just need to trust it to carry on." In the months that followed, the Westbrooks took a step back and focused on what mattered most. The people they were helping, the families they were empowering, and the businesses that were finding new ways to do good while still thriving. They learned to trust the process, to delegate more, and to allow others to carry the torch. By the end of the year, the Catalyst initiative had helped hundreds of families move into new homes, provided job training for thousands, and connected people with educational opportunities they had never dreamed of. The impact was undeniable, and it was just the beginning. Charles and Eleanor stood in the center of one of the community centers they had helped build, surrounded by the families they had supported. They looked around at the smiling faces, at the kids playing, and the parents finding hope where there had once been none. For the first time, they felt complete, not because of the success of their business, but because of the difference they had made. "We've created something that matters," Eleanor said, her voice filled with quiet awe. Charles nodded, a sense of peace settling over him. "We've built something that will last. And that's all we ever wanted." The Westbrooks' journey had come full circle. From the arrogant couple who had laughed at a boy's dream, to the leaders of a nationwide movement that was changing lives. Their transformation wasn't just about their own redemption. It was about creating a future where businesses, communities, and individuals all had the opportunity to thrive. And as they looked out at the future they were building, they knew that the journey had only just begun. As the Westbrooks stood in the community center, surrounded by families who had benefited from their work, they realized that their journey wasn't just a personal transformation, it was a testament to the power of second chances and the ripple effects of giving back. The children running around, the adults engaged in conversation, the laughter that filled the space, it all felt like a dream come true. The Catalyst initiative had done more than transform their business. It had transformed their lives and the lives of countless others. What had started as an effort to redeem their image had evolved into a movement that was creating real change, one community at a time. The future, once uncertain, now seemed full of possibility. Eleanor turned to Charles, her eyes soft with emotion. "We did it," she whispered, her voice filled with awe. Charles smiled, taking her hand in his. "We didn't just do it for ourselves, Eleanor. We did it for all these people, for every child who now has a chance to dream." They stood there in silence for a moment, soaking in the enormity of what they had accomplished. The Westbrooks had been given a second chance, not just by the people they had helped, but by the community they had become a part of. And in turn, they had given others the opportunity to rise. The next day, the Westbrooks met with the investors who had once questioned their approach. The meeting was tense, but this time, they didn't need to prove anything. They had already done the work, built the projects, and shown that businesses could be successful while making a real difference. "We've seen the impact you've made," one of the investors said, his tone begrudgingly respectful. "And we're willing to support you, not just with funds, but with our full backing. You've proven that your model works. And we want to help you take it even further." Charles and Eleanor exchanged a look, their hearts light. For the first time in years, they weren't fighting to prove their worth. They were receiving validation for the work they had done. As they left the meeting, Charles felt a sense of peace settle over him. The doubts, the challenges, and the fears of the past had finally given way to something tangible: success, not just in business, but in life. "Do you think we've found our true purpose?" Eleanor asked, her voice thoughtful as they walked down the hallway. Charles nodded. "I think we've always known what it was. We just needed to open our eyes and see it clearly." The Westbrooks continued to expand their work, growing their community projects across the country. The Catalyst Initiative was a model for other businesses to follow, showing that profit and purpose weren't mutually exclusive. The Westbrooks had built a legacy that was about more than just wealth. It was about creating opportunities for others to succeed, about lifting people up, and about making a lasting impact on the world. Their business grew, but so did their hearts. They continued to invest in their community, not just financially, but emotionally. They mentored the next generation of leaders, sharing their story of redemption, teaching others that it was never too late to change, and that real leadership was about service to others. Years later, as the Westbrooks stood in a newly opened community center in a city they had once never imagined visiting, they felt the weight of their journey. The project they had launched had reached more people than they ever thought possible. Children who had once lived in poverty now had access to education, job training, and mentorship. Families who had been struggling now had homes, security, and hope for the future. And standing among them were not just the people they had helped, but those who had come together to help others, just as they once had. As they looked around at the bustling center, Eleanor turned to Charles, her eyes filled with pride and gratitude. This is what it's all been about." Charles squeezed her hand. "We've come full circle. And we've given others the chance to do the same." The Westbrooks had started as a couple who mocked a boy's dream. They had laughed at something they didn't understand. But over the years, they had learned that real success wasn't measured by wealth or power. It was measured by the difference you made in the world, the lives you touched, and the legacy you left behind. And now, as they looked out at the future they had helped build, they knew that their journey wasn't just theirs, it was the world's. A world where dreams, no matter how small, could come true if only people believed in them. And so, the Westbrooks continued their journey, not as the wealthy couple they once were, but as leaders, mentors, and most importantly, as a family who had learned the power of redemption, kindness, and the ability to change the world, one dream at a time.